Greetings. So, apologies. I had to extract some energies for myself, and in doing so, I kind of fell behind. I was trying to do at least 2 uploads per day, but also that just might not be logistically possible for a little while. So I'm just gonna take it at my own pace. We're gonna start on page 114, which is where we left off. It's talking about echolocation in bats. Scientific disbelief hampered the discovery of echolocation in bats. Could not be the same happening with plants. Indeed, others have suggested echolocation as one motivation for a plant to make a sound at all. Climbing vines are known to circle the air in seedlings, looking for upright staff to climb, and seem to locate the position of an appropriate climbing surface long before actually coming into contact with it. I don't know why Mustafa. I almost just said Mustafa instead of climbing staff, which was really idiotic. I don't know. Yeah. Stefano Mancuso, one of the original plant neurobiologists, advocates, and a frequent collaborator of Gagliano's, had used time-lapse video to observe this phenomenon in bean plants as they search for and locate a nearby metal pole. Again, caviation. The part purely coincidental sound. I think we've already read through this. Yeah. Okay, the end is that the last sentence right here. It says, "Still, the hard evidence is yet to come," and that was where we left off. Excuse me. I'm just reminding myself where we were. Could plants have something to say? Gagliano wants to find out. At this point, these questions have not been answered, nor have they really been asked in terms of actual experiments. But up until recently, the same was true for that other, now accepting mode of plant communication from earlier, chemical signaling. The birth of plant chemical ecology, for example, unveiled the strikingly talkative nature of plants and the eloquence of their volatile vocabulary, Gagliano wrote. Already, scientists have found compelling evidence that language is not entirely confined to the human realm. Prairie dogs appear to use adjectives, specific repeated sounds they use to describe the size, shape, color, and speed of their predators. Japanese great tits have syntax. They have used distinct strings of chirps to instruct their comrades to scan for danger or tell them to move closer. We've heard about songbirds using back channels for alarm calls and risk-averse chipmunks screaming at the slightest spook. Yeah, my nose is itching horribly right now. I don't know what is it that with Japanese great tits? That just sounds like a voluptuous Japanese woman to me, but I'd like to know what they actually are. Or, I'm supposing it's a bird, but I. Okay, this is the Japanese. This is according to Google, by the way. Just googly it, right? Um, the Japanese tit, Parus minor, also known as the Oriental tit, is a passerine bird which replaces the singular great tit in Japan and the Russia Far East beyond the Amur River, including the Kuril Islands. And this is what I'm saying. There's actually, I need to scan for a moment, and thank God they started blurring out the images, because there really was a really voluptuous Japanese woman. It wasn't just me. I swear I'm not being perverted. But they blurred out those ones that were rather curvy in nature. Nothing against curvy women. I love myself. But at the same time, that's the bird. This is what a Japanese tit looks like. Okay. Then you all know what prairie dogs look like already. I'm not really that versed in ornithology. I guess I might need glasses, but I might not. I don't know. Yeah, don't go there with, I just am hearing like, never mind, all kinds of Leonard, never mind. Perhaps it would be small-minded of us to foreclose on the possibility of a sound-based plant language emerging too. To bring up Gagliardo's name among biologists is a highly divisive act at this point in time. She has become a contested figure in the field, even as her profile beyond the ivory tower grows. In 2020, a graduate student at the University of California, Davis tried to replicate a particularly radical plea learning study of hers, which put peas through a Y maze and found they could learn to associate benign cues with rewards, much like animals. In this case, the cues were gentle wind from a fan, and the reward was light. The conclusion would be world-changing if true. Associative learning is a crucial measure of intelligence in animals, but the graduate student couldn't make it work. His peas didn't show signs of learning. He began to hear more murmurs that basically discounted Gagliano altogether. The whole episode damaged her reputation within botany circles. Still, it must be noted that replication is a tricky thing. The ability for multiple independent people to repeat a study and get the same result is absolutely crucial for confirming new scientific conclusions, but its impossibility doesn't always mean the original outcome is incorrect. It does, however, mean the study design isn't sturdy enough to hang one's hat on. Interesting. I think there's a dance called Getting Sturdy. It's like a, you know how we've got the Cupid Shuffle and the slide, the cha-cha slide and whatnot. I think there's literally a dance called Getting Sturdy in some Asiatic country. I don't know what it is, but just Japanese tits and getting sturdy. I don't know why I'm in this mood today. Don't judge me, please. Just listen to the message. It does, however, mean that the study design isn't sturdy enough to hang one's hat on. If the conclusions are in fact true, they'll have to wait for a better experiment to prove them out. For others, it was Gagliano's 2018 memoir, Thus Spoke the Plant, that put her reputation over the edge. In it, she describes taking ayahuasca in a shamanic ritual in Peru and communing with the spirit of the plant, who told her how to best design her studies. In science, there's a tacit separation of church and state. I put this little note right here. I'll read it to you because I think, I told you I'm going to share my thoughts. Supposedly, in all business, there's supposed to be separation of church and state unless you're literally a religious organization that's exempt. But even on every dollar bill, might I add, it says, "In God we trust." So that's not equal to state money. God and state. We don't use money inside of states. Never mind. Purity in science means not wading into mystical waters, or at least if you do, keeping it to yourself. Science is made up of people, and if those people don't like your work, or if they see you as not one of their tribe, you might get heckled, and you might not get funded. Gagliano has been heckled at conferences where men, they're always men, have stood up to berate her, and in journals where groups of botanists, again men, have written letters in protest. But others have been less harsh. They don't understand why she's been so pilloried, with plenty of men in academia having gone down more mystic routes. Others are more nuanced. Sure, it seems like her study design on the P learning paper may have been faulty, but her ideas were good. P learning paper. I don't know why toilet paper. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know why I'm this way. I just am. Okay. You can't say pee and paper in the same sentence and then tell me not to think about a whole bunch of Chuck Norris jokes. Okay. And they were thankful that someone was pushing their field to ask bolder questions, particularly around plant acoustics. Her work advocating for phytoacoustics had made a real difference. It was time to take the world of plant hearing seriously. It is remarkable, meanwhile, to see the gulf between how the scientific and non-scientific world has received Gagliano. She speaks to packed audiences at conferences on philosophy and at science events geared toward the general public. A profile of her ran in the Style, not Science, section of the New York Times in 2019. WNYC's Radiolab profiled her work in an episode, and she'd given interviews for half a dozen other mainstream outlets. Hers are science ideas that resonate deeply with those outside the institution of science itself. So, if you want to play dot to dot on the scale of your brain, then she makes sense of science in a way that a lot of even fashion editors can relate with. It remains to be seen how history views Monica Gagliano, but I see her as a perfect symbol of the times. She has a foot in two worlds, just as the emerging science around plants is forcing a confrontation between them. She has written papers in feminist theory journals that seem to advocate for scientists to use more of a felt sense in their methodologies, acknowledging that this is completely anti-ethical to how they are trained. In 2022, a paper co-authored with University of California Davis anthropologist Christy Onzik, she cited Nobel laureate Barbara McClintock's unusual methodology, which ultimately led her to her field-shifting breakthrough in 1944 about the nature of corn genetics. McClintock found that some genes could jump, spontaneously changing their position in the chromosome, a previously unheard of proposition. McClintock would observe her corn plants for hours, losing herself in the act of, I thought it was going to say, lose yourself in the moment, the music, the moment you own it, you better never let it go. This might be your, whatever, the real Slim Shady. That's not what it says, though. I don't know. My mouth feels better. My jaw feels great. So, I just being really goofy. Excuse me. Little sip of water. Little sip of water. Just to wet the whistle, sips of water do that. Losing herself in the act of reverence and close listening until she felt she had a feeling for the organism and was newly capable of direct communication with it. It took years for the molecular scale technologies to arise, which proved to her colleagues that her discovery was true. Perhaps scientists should be more open to losing their grip on the rationalist certainties that sustain their careers, posit Onzik and Gagliano. Onzik, whose chosen focus as an anthropologist is on the culture of the researchers who study plant behavior, accompanied Gagliano to her lab in Australia, where she was attempting to study whether roots can choose to grow in a path of least resistance by anticipating and avoiding roadblocks. It was similar in design to her experiment on roots, sensing the direction of flowing water, but this time she was using more complex mazes with 4 arms instead of 2. Wonder if this could be applied to the concepts of love. There's a card in this specific deck, the Motherhood deck, and I just only happen to know this because I drew it during a love reading the other day. It's this one right here. This woman has 4 arms instead of 2, quite literally. There's an arm there, there's an arm there, arm there, arm there. Then she has 2 legs, of course, but it is the 6 of Wands, which is actually victory. Onzik watched as Gagliano grew frustrated with the sterile conditions in the lab and the prodigious waste presented by the styrofoam boxes her plexiglass maze components arrived in. Without much hesitation, she packed up her mazes and traveled inside to a house in the subtropical forest of New South Wales, Onzik wrote. There, surrounded by spiders, newts, and snakes, she set up her experiment again. The new environment was not sterile or temperature controlled. She had now departed deliberately from the realm of replicable science. So if you've ever, I think I've already spoken on this. One of my coworkers was mentioning to me that in the show 40 Rock, I don't know which character it is because I've never watched 40 Rock, to be quite honest with you, but he says that there's a character that basically figures out that if she doesn't want company, she just like makes everything around her dirty and herself dirty so that she'll be repulsive to company. And it's like a really passive aggressive, non-direct way of being like, I don't want people in my space. Okay. Just interesting thinking about the waste of like MySpace.com or platforms like that. In that, there's no longer any kind of controlled amazement, if you will. People are volunteering the information and therefore susceptible to experimentation. Just a thought. Also, sorry, I'm gonna read this, I swear, but if you've never seen the movie The Labyrinth, you should go watch it if you're into like kind of mysticism, but also finding oneself through what would otherwise be perceived as a living hell. There, surrounded by spiders, newts, and snakes, she set up her experiments again. The new environment was not sterile or temperature controlled. She had now departed deliberately from the realm of replicable science. Whatever happened next was unlikely to be admissible in conventional scientific journals, but she was feeling around for a different way of knowing. Onzik writes, the line between spiritual and scientific worlds is a treacherous position to occupy, and certainly subject to criticism and even contempt from peers. Yet Gagliano seems comfortable there and unflinching. I see her as attempting to bring those two worlds into relation with each other. In some ways, she exists as the crux of the war over plant intelligence. It probably helps that she is now funded by $1 million Templeton World Charity Foundation grant that supports the study of diverse intelligences. She is affiliated with Southern Cross University in Australia, but her funding is no longer tied to traditional federal sources. Maintaining academic palatability is no longer a concern, at least not for financial reasons. Gagliano spoke at Dartmouth in early 2020 about humbling ourselves as humans. We are the new kids on the block. Traditionally, you should pay respect to the elders, by which she meant bacteria, fungi, and plants. She called the view of humanity at the top of an evolutionary chain arrogant and juvenile. Who said that science is the only way of knowing? As a scientist, I love science, Gagliano said at Dartmouth. I think it's a beautiful way to describe the world, but it's not the only way. Okay, my love. You can sit on my lap if you want, or you can get on the table, either way. I'm struck by the existential conflict that the idea of a hearing plant has kicked up. Ostensibly, a conflict between science and spirituality. But I'm struck too by the realization that no one is disputing that plants can actually hear. What they are listening for, of course, remains to be fully determined, but it is an earth-shaking revelation on its own for someone who has spent her entire life so far operating under the assumption of the opposite. My world of sound always seemed fundamentally separate from anything plants might be involved in, but lately, my idea of what a plant is altogether was changing. They apparently intrude on all levels of our sensory world. Suddenly, the sphere in which I exist, the feeling, sharing, hearing world, seemed to be losing its fundamental separateness from the world of foliage. A wall I'd unwittingly constructed between the two was getting thinner, more transparent, like the wet membrane of a soap bubble, threatening to tear. Hard green buds were poking through. Boom. That brings us to chapter 6. I'm just going to go ahead and do our reading because that's pages 114 through 119. Well, not through, but to 119, excuse me. Let's start with the plant life and see what it has to say. Being ostracized, being belittled, underrated, and kind of the underdog, if you will, is something that a lot of us can kind of like relate to. I don't know if you've ever seen like those Victoria's Secret shirts that have dogs on them, like the Victoria's Secret dog, but it's kind of the underwear. It's like standing in your underwear in front of the world. It's not an easy task. It's a difficult undertaking, and there's lintel in reverse with the Q. Okay, the morel mushroom is also here, but I'm not taking this. This is the lintel in reverse. Lintel comes from the Latin word lens, like the lens of your eye, for its optical lens shape. And that's in reverse. Yeah, lentils are about the size of like the pupil of your eye. Pupil is also a word obviously used for students in school, but also the pupil of your eye is the retina, the iris, all that, all the above. Those are different things, obviously, but I'm just saying that they all have to do with eyeballs. If you were to buy a contact lens, they would need to consider all of the above in order to get the correct prescription. Inokataki, most commonly used in warm dishes like soups, stews, and stir-fry vegetables. This is the 3 in the reverse. So there's something about, you know how people say there's always 3 perspectives to every single point of view, right? It's you, the person that you're talking to, and then God or the higher powers. The powers that be. We'll put it like that. That's kind of the way that I'm perceiving this, is that you can't really decide to cue someone else's experience. You may both be eyewitnesses to the same exact movie, for example. You could watch a movie together and take away completely different morals of the story, or have been emotionally moved in different directions for different reasons based off different previous experiential learning processes. Some people like anime, for example, since we're going with the voluptuous Japanese women, right? There's, excuse me, let me get some of my blue water. There's also, there's a whole entire Cartoon Network. There's Nickelodeon. There's Adult Swim. There's, you've got a whole bunch of different kinds of Simpsons, Family Guy, Cleveland Brown. Those are just a few to name off the top of your head, but it's a preference thing, and it depends on the type of emotional stimulation that you're primed to receive or to react to, right? RxN, kind of like a remedy to something or a trigger, one or the other. I feel like that's what they were talking about with Gagliano, is the fact that she was perceived in multiple different ways over by her peers, but also her work was never actually proven until much later. Technology had to catch up to where she was. She was actually ahead of her time in that regard. We've got 2 mushrooms on the table now. This is the chanterelle mushroom, having a fruity aroma, but is noted to have a peppery flavor. That's what it looks like. So now we've got Q in reverse, the Q of lentils. That sounds so weird. The 3 of Enokataki, and the 7 of chanterelle, all in reverse. So I think that the point of this, and the point of what they were saying here, is that if you don't believe in something, you're less likely to witness it or to perceive it. If I don't believe that anime is good, or I don't believe that cartoons are very fun to watch, and I don't believe in I think they're for children, you know what I'm saying? Then I might not be inclined to watch any of the Adult Swim content out there, you know what I'm saying? However, if I have really enjoyed cartoons as a child and continue to maybe have magazines, like, comic books that I've referenced over the years, or for me it was X-Men. Yeah. Then they did turn into Marvel movies and Pixar movies, and a whole plethora of different Disney references and whatnot. But all I'm trying to say is that most of us saw, for example, Cinderella as a cartoon in Disney. That's the one we need. This is buckwheat in the reverse coming out at the bottom of the deck. This is number 4 for the reading. So I'm going to grab this off the floor and see what it is. Yeah. This is the only one that landed. This actually landed in the upright, and it's peanuts. Good grief. That's exactly my point. Okay, well, I told you Chuck Norris jokes were like already there. So there's Charlie Brown for you. It depends on the way that you were raised. It depends on what kind of I'm just seeing the king and queen energy here, both in the reverse. This is one energy though. I'm talking about cartoons, and I am using cartoons as they relate to making a mockery or kind of, it's a humorous thing. If we're talking about the medical field and the lens of someone's eyes, that's a medical thing, right? Or the iris, which could also be a different type. It's a flower, which is another kind of plant. If we're talking about the humorous side of ourselves, your humerus is also a bone in your body. So that's what I mean, is that there are going to be multiple subjects that cross-reference one another if we're playing dot to dot, yet again, from point A to point B, and then seeing our way through it, right? That's the point here, is that I'm going to read the definition of peanuts because I think it's going to help. It takes about 540 peanuts to make a 12-ounce jar of peanut butter. That's a lot of peanuts. That is a lot of peanuts. I never knew that. I've actually never read this card before. I've never read this specific definition of peanuts on this specific deck before. It takes about 540 peanuts for a tiny little 12-ounce jar of peanut butter. I was wondering why it was so expensive. Anyway, just that was completely irrelevant. But interesting. This is buckwheat. And when you're talking about the concentration of something, the saturation of something, the way that light saturates your eye, or it filters through the lens of your eye, if it's something, look, Q, 3, 7, and 10. So up until this point in the read, if this one's Qing 3 and 7, 3 and 7 is 10. So it's almost like Q10, 10, but then there's like also the Q10s of a company or a business are the business records from the last quarter or yearly report. Just in case you like candlestick charts for some reason. I know I'm a nerd. I realize that I am a complete nerd, kind of a dork all the way across the spectrum. But in any way, buckwheat, the money, buckwheat, like the brokerage, yeah. It's peanuts to some people. It's just peanuts, you know? To other people, it's a mystery. It's Charlie Brown having Linus, the lentil, as his best friend, who carries around a nasty, grody, dirty blanket. Remember, she's talking about the circumstances of the experiment, not liking the styrofoam pieces being all over the place from the styrofoam boxes, or not liking the sterile environment. So actually intentionally throwing that off. That's what I was talking about with 40 Rock. Maybe reality TV shows are more like your style. I don't know that. I don't not know that either. What I'm trying to say is that perception is not everything. That first impressions are once upon a time, you know? But the first impression that you have of somebody isn't necessarily, if you've known that person for the following 10 years, right? 10 years is peanuts to 10 minutes introduction to somebody. Is that correct? So after 10 years, you might know something about that person that you didn't know at all. It's tenure. Having tenure, having been educated, pupil education. You know, a pupil to tenure It's the way you've been predisposed to understanding the world around you. That's the way I'm getting this. And if you're constantly looking at it through a monetary value or through the let's read the definition of buckwheat. I don't know why, but Little Rascals just came to mind. That one where they're all on the roller coaster vomiting their brains out in the very opening scene. Ugh, that traumatized me for years. Despite the name, buckwheat is a fruit seed, not a wheat. Oh, it's a fruit. I didn't know that. See, you learn something new every day. Yeah. So that's basically my point, though, is that like if you're looking at things for monetary value or what you would think that they are, if you look at this, it does not look like a fruit. I would have thought buckwheat was some type of wheat because it's got the name wheat in the name. You know, um, that's a bad judge of character. Like it's kind of like judging a book by its cover. Okay. So, oh look, there's the queen again, but this time in the upright. Let me see what comes out here because I'd like to see how this is going to play itself out. Yeah, even on the cover of this book, I just was thinking don't judge a book by its cover, right? It says how the unseen world of plant intelligence offers a new understanding of life on Earth. Okay, so it is about the way that we understand things around us. Without plant life, how would you understand life on Earth? We would understand it without vegetables, right? Without the vegetable nutrients, how do you think people would? There's that buckwheat. How do you think that people would make money? What would the bartering have been like in the early human days, and how would we have grown strong and healthy over the years? Um, there's a question of that, but there's also a question of the way that we perceive things, similar to music, since we're talking about that also. If we've never heard music, if you've never heard music from the day that you were born, how do you think that would have affected your experience of life itself? Do you think it would have enriched you or taken something away? Just a question. I don't know the answer to these things. These are just questions that are out there, and you can either think about them or not. It doesn't really, no skin off my back, but no skin off my teeth either. There's the castle with lintel. Yeah, so I just think it's interesting that it's talking about the Latin word, which is actually Latin words are usually the root of a lot of English words. So it's almost like a foreign castle is here, and somebody who speaks Latin and sees things through a very limited kind of view would not have the that conversation about you, me, and whatever is above. You know what I'm saying? There's that part of the equation would be left out because you wouldn't be able to communicate. Same way we can't communicate with plants is the same way that animals can't communicate with us necessarily. They can if you're paying attention. But if you don't believe that they can communicate, then you'll never look for it. You'll never perceive it. No matter how much chanting or praying or meditation, if your belief is that that plants are completely unconscious, do not possess intelligence, and never will, then you'll probably never climb in that direction. That's not a mental climb. You'll never try to play dot to dot, which means you'll never play dot to dot, which means you'll never make the dot to dot into a big picture for yourself, if that makes sense. Peanuts. There you go. This is the good grief. I'm seeing Merryweather. I don't know all of Cinderella's rats, all of their names. Gus was one of the rats, but then she's got her she's got rats. Like I'm thinking of animals, Cinderella's relationship with dirt, animals, plants, and this ability to imagine, do the dot to dot between her current manifested life and the life that she was going to live. She was she was moving into the castle, right? And although the plants, the animals, and all of the hard work that she put into making that her reality was something that she perceived, her evil stepsisters and stepmother just laughed at her the entire time. All three of them. She had stepsisters and an evil stepmom. All three of them were just laughing at her for the entire time until she met the prince. She had no money, buckwheat. I'm just seeing someone with buck teeth, and maybe that's only because of my, Yeah, look. This is the buckwheat with this would look. I'm telling you, her evil stepsisters. This is them wanting to go to the ball only so that they could like hack into the prince's life. You know what I'm saying? And get across the wall. Remember that she was talking about this. It's like the end of chapter 6 right here. Yeah. A wall I'd unwittingly constructed between the two was getting thinner, more transparent, like the wet membrane of a soap bubble threatening to tear. Hard green buds were poking through. That's what I mean, is that like it's almost like there's a need not to look at things through monetary value or at taking things at face value. For don't judge the book by its cover. Cinderella's glass slipper proved that, right? But the invention of the glass slipper to take around and try on to the idea that the prince had of taking the glass slipper to each separate house to try on to each separate person, so he could find Cinderella, the woman whose foot it matched exactly. That was not an idea that came to be until after he'd already been bamboozled, swindled, kind of tricked, I guess, into a position where, as the king, he was on the other side of this wall, and he was not looking for somebody with money. He wasn't looking for somebody with a whole bunch of wheat fields or agricultural finesse. The people on the outside were looking at him for his money, for his land, and for his um, elite prestige, right? That's not what Cinderella wanted, and that's why she became the queen. She had a different point of view about the prince. It wasn't she wasn't lusting for money. She wasn't lusting for status. She wasn't lusting for anything except for real love, true love. I don't know why I'm doing that. I feel like I'm being sinister, but yeah. If you've ever seen the version of Cinderella with Brandy and Whitney Houston, I don't know why that song that Whitney sings at the Bodyguard, I Will Always Love You, like that comes to mind here for some reason. It's kind of like that. It's understanding that, like, unless you can kind of interface with a different species or a different race or a different culture of people outside of your own, then you kind of lose that ability to communicate. You can't just speak Latin if you're going to go to visit, I don't know, where did Princess Jasmine live? Or uh, Ariel, yeah, the bottom of the sea, like the ocean, right? If you speak Latin, that's fine if you go to the ocean, but it doesn't mean you're going to help Ariel walk. Like, you speaking Latin doesn't help Ariel walk, if that makes sense. There's just a wall. There's a wall between your verbal speech, her singing, and wanting to be with Eric on the beach, walking amongst the humans. Anyway, I'm getting kind of carried away, but you understand what I mean about the cartoonish, being ridiculed, being belittled, or treated like a child, treated like you're incompetent, or that your mysticism is irrelevant. It may be in some people's eyes. I'm not going to lie about that. Sometimes I even scoff at people. I'm not above being human. However, it doesn't mean I'm correct either. It just means I have an opinion, which are like assholes. Everyone has one, and it's valid. So, yeah. Last but not least, I'm going to go ahead and grab one Nadia Turner card to go here. I don't really feel like doing all of these again. I feel like it's made, the message has made its point here. That the idea of what a plant is maybe more subject to intentional design. If your intention is to understand a plant, then maybe understanding the plant means that the plant will understand you. It's like maybe what you're looking at is looking for you. Maybe what you're seeking is seeking you. Ooh. Yeah, they say don't stare too deep into the abyss. Yeah, stare into it. See what it stares back at you. And if it scares the living bejesus out of you, then stop staring so hard. You know? It's kind of the point of having a huge telescope fixed on dark spaces where we can find black holes. Here's the storyteller in reverse. The storyteller in the upright, stories are medicine, strengthening, and renewing. In the reverse, it means that you're not, I don't think this means that you're not getting the medicine from this tree person, because this tree person is reading a book. I just think that it's not a story, that the plant, the tree, might actually have a life. When you look at the top of this tree, if I just cover the top of this tree and the top of this crown, don't you think they look kind of similar? Like, in all reality, let's just be real. Let's just be real. Maybe the stories that you read, or the fables that you hear, or the Mother Goose rhymes, and all of the little lady who lived in a shoe, and Jiminy Cricket, excuse me, and all of the Grimm's fairy tales, they could have had some validity to them. Lord of the Rings, kind of, you know. Who is Orlando Bloom in Lord of the Rings? Is he the king of the fairies? Who's the one that can control the trees? Is there, I don't know, I haven't watched that series in so long, or that saga, or whatever, in so long. It's ridiculous. How I need to do that. However, you know what I'm talking about, that the trees come alive and help fight the war. That's not so surf-like, if we're talking medieval, okay? That's much more of a noble thing to do. It is much more of a royal thing to wish for, the intention behind it, that the earth, or the plants, the animals, and the humans, and maybe the fairies. The only reason I'm saying fairies is because this is Nadia Turner fairy deck. They all work together. And it's not so far-fetched if you know where to look. To on that photosynthesis, on that specific photosyntheticness.